Today is Tuesday, May 3rd, 2016. Let the record show that all three commissioners are present. We have a couple of advisory committee meetings coming up. The Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee meeting is on Thursday, May 12th, 5 p.m. at the GA Conference Room at BLI, and the next Marina Advisory Committee meeting is Tuesday, May 10th at 6 p.m. at the Welcome Boathouse. Looks like we have one person signed up in our public comments. And if you haven't signed up but you want to speak, that's totally fine. Let's just start with Doug first. Doug. Sorry, broken.
Hello, my name is Doug Rubel. I wonder how many of us understand that money does not exist. It's a delusion. We spend our lives chasing this delusion, beating each other over the head, and beating the crap out of the environment for a delusion. Money does not exist. We beat the compassion out of each other. The only thing that's real in this world is compassion, is love and kindness. Money is death. We beat each other up for a delusion. We destroy the environment for a delusion. Where is our compassion? Our compassion for each other, our compassion for the environment. If we keep destroying the environment, we're destroying ourselves. It makes no sense. It's insanity. Now, I've cried a lot of tears because I finally realized I was a part of doing that. I can't do that anymore. I have to wake up my compassion. I have to start caring about people, and I have to start caring about the environment. We have to. Self-destruction is foolishness. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I wish you all health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Anybody else that has not signed up that would like to address the commission? All right, we will have another opportunity at 5:30. And with that, we're going to start with our consent agenda. Diane?
A motion to approve the consent agenda items A through I.
All right, gentlemen, any particular points you'd like to make about this?
The only question I had in Uber going to the cruise terminal, is that the same rate that it was for the airport that we're charging them?
Thank you, Commissioner. Terry Leahy, Real Estate Representative. Yes, it's exactly the same rate, $1.50 per pickup and $1.50 per drop-off.
Thank you. I just couldn't remember what it was.
How's it been working at the airport? Has things been going okay out with Uber? I mean, we had any issues or?
If I may ask, Sunil.
No serious issues. A couple of complaints with regards to drivers not displaying their trade dress. We have been coordinating with the management company, the local contact for Uber. Revenues aren't what we projected. They're about 1/3, so we projected about $3,000 a quarter. We're coming in at a little less than $1,100 a quarter.
Thank you, Sunil.
I should point out that items G and H regarding the All-American Marine facility are related to an action item we'll see later. So if for some reason action item number 3 fails to move forward, then items G and H would be on hold. But I don't see that we need to spend too much time talking about G and H right now, unless anybody else wants to.
You're not suggesting pull G and H off?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, it's okay, okay. Okay.
On the security services contract, I wanted to clarify. The adjusted amount of the contract would be $263,347. I think that's the amount of the contract, not an adjusted amount. Am I correct? That's the entire amount of the contract? That's below background on the second paragraph.
Neil Clement, Emergency Management and Security Officer for the port. It was the total amount.
Okay. I just kind of the way it read there is the adjusted amount. I wasn't sure if we were adjusting and adding that or so. Okay, thank you. That's clarification. Thanks, Neil.
All right, nothing further? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, now we've got a funding update regarding Model Toxic Control Act. Gowan.
Right. All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowan, Director of Environmental Programs. Over the past year or so, as you know, we've had a number of discussions about the Model Toxics Control Act funding situation. We've had a lot of project-specific questions. We've had kind of a global discussion about the fund and where it stands. And so I had a couple times mentioned I would like to come back to the Commission with an overall kind of comprehensive update of where we currently stand with our remedial action grants, where we're going forward, what came out of the supplemental budget, and what kind of where we think we're looking as we move forward. So that was the goal of the update here today. I'd be happy to entertain any questions as we go along. And yeah, so that's the intent of this discussion. No action or decisions that are required based on this update, though. So what I was going to talk about here a little bit was just go over a little bit of background, a little bit of history and background on the Model Toxics Control Act, or MODCA, the fund itself, and then the remedial action grants that we base a number of our cleanups get funding through. Then talk a little bit about the existing grants and what we have in our current capacity. There's been some confusion and discussion about that in the past on what's new money. There's new money, there's old money, there's reappropriated money. Just want to be able to address those questions as they come up and clarify. And Tamara makes numbers and money fun. I think I'm going to do my best to live up to your presentation skills here, but I don't know if I can do that. And then talk a little bit about the recent spending that we've had. We've had a lot of cleanup work that's been done this past year. So those existing grants have been reduced pretty significantly because we've done a lot of work. Then review kind of that MODCA fund crisis scenario that we had as we were going into this supplemental budget scenario. Talk about what came out of that, and then where we're going as we go forward, hopefully. So just in the way of background here, the Model Toxics Control Act, or MODCA, is the Washington State cleanup law. That was actually passed by a citizens initiative in 1988, I-97. And kind of unique to that situation, though, is that rather than being an unfunded mandate, it actually came with a funding mechanism, that there was a hazardous substance tax that was accompanied that initiative that funded the program, as well as a number of other parts that went along with that law. And it's based essentially on a tax on the price that's linked to the price per barrel of oil. So any hazardous substance, and there's a pretty long list of those that are imported into Washington State, there's a tax that's taken based on the wholesale value of that product. Primarily, though, because we have a number of refineries here, that the majority of that fund is supported by a tax on oil based on a price per barrel. That hazardous substance tax then gets allocated primarily into two accounts. There's the state toxics account and then the local toxics account. Those are the two original accounts that were developed during the 1988 law. And they take the money from the hazardous substance tax. The state toxic account funds ecology programs, a number of other things at the state level. The local toxics account then is the primary funding mechanism for the remedial action grants that we depend on, and cities and counties and ports are eligible for, as well as funding for local health departments that do a variety of different source control for landfills and a variety of things like that. In 2013, there was a new account that was established called the Environmental Legacy Stewardship Account, or the ELSA account. That was actually spearheaded by some MOTCA reforms that were developed through our delegation, actually, Senator Erickson and Senator Ranker, and they jointly created a number of new tools, and one of them was this ELSA account. And that is set up that at that particular time, the fund had price per oil was about $100 per barrel. There was a lot of money in those accounts, and they were looking at trying to utilize that for a variety of different things. And they set up this ELSA account where once the fund got to a certain point, any spillover would go into the ELSA account, and that could be used for a variety of different projects, stormwater, source control, that sort of thing. And we actually have a couple of ELSA grants as well. So it's a well-managed. It's been historically a very well-managed program. There's been ups and downs with it, but it has a lot of thought and process that went into developing this and how it's managed. So for here forward, I was going to talk a little bit more about our sites, our port cleanup projects. This map just shows, it doesn't show all of our sites. We have approximately 15 to 20 MOTCA cleanup sites in our portfolio. This kind of highlights the more higher profile ones, or the ones that are in the formal cleanup program. As you can see, there's a number of sites here in Bellingham, all the way from the Yorkston fuel site and the Northwest fuel site up here on Roeder, throughout the Central Waterfront, the Georgia Pacific Mill property, the Cornwall Avenue landfill, and the Harris Avenue shipyard down there in Fairhaven. And then two primary cleanup sites up in Blaine, which is the Blaine Marina Fuel Facility and the Westman Marine Shipyard. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the geographic distribution of some of our sites. And then now, I guess, into the numbers here. This is a summary of where we're at with our existing grants. So we have, over time, worked with the Department of Ecology. And if you recall, Jim Pendowski came to speak to the commission last October, and had discussed how Ecology had been hand in hand with us when we went into this large acquisition of the Georgia Pacific properties. And at the time, there was the idea that these big cleanup projects would be front-loaded, knowing that each biennium, every 2 years, the legislature approves a budget, and that these big multi-biennium projects would be front-loaded, and we'd accumulate a fair amount of grant funding, and then once the full project was funded, we would pull the trigger and do the cleanup projects. And so we had a fair amount of money started to be stockpiled away as we were trying to front load the Whatcom Waterway cleanup project. That has changed a little bit, and so those projects, though, that's what we consider our existing grants, or our old money. Each biennium, that money has to be reappropriated by the state legislature. So there's new money that comes into the account through the hazardous substance tax. These older grants are then reappropriated as well. So they're relatively safe. They're under existing contracts with the state. And those are the projects, when we come to the commission with a project and we say the funding includes an existing MOTCA remedial action grant, these are the grants that we're talking about. So currently, this is our current snapshot. Actually, Alan Birdsall in the Environmental Division does a great job of managing our grants. We have a fair amount of submittals that we have to do for these grants. And these are updated actually just yesterday. So these are the most current numbers that we have on our existing remedial action grants. So we have, as you can see, about $278,000 in Blaine Marina Tank Farm, $1.4 million in Central Waterfront, and down the line there, $3.7 million in at the Georgia Pacific West property, and then $2.5 million at the Whatcom Waterway. All told, we have an existing grant capacity of about $10.7 million under contract with the Department of Ecology. And it's worth noting that that represents half of the capacity for cleanup. They pay for 50% of the cleanup. So we have about $21 million worth of cleanup that we can get accomplished here with the existing grants. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So then moving on here, this is goes into our recent spending, and this is a really interesting snapshot. The right-hand column, the existing funding, that's the same slide that I just showed, the previous slide. And then if you go to the right there where it says 1 year ago, so 1 year ago, that was what we had in those existing grants. We had, and I have the bold and the large dollar changes. In Central Waterfront, we had 5.1 million. We now have 1.4 million. GP West, we had 4.4, now we have 3.7. And the really significant one is 1 year ago, we had $15.7 million in grant capacity for Whatcom Waterway, and today we have 2.5. So we have spent over $18.2 million in grant dollars in the last 12 months. So there's been a lot of work going on the Whatcom Waterway and the Waterfront District and a lot of those cleanups, including GP West. So we've done over $36 million in cleanup work in the past year. So that represents a lot of work, but it also represents a diminishing amount of our grant capacity. So any questions on our grant capacity right now before I move into kind of the MODCA fund situation? Okay. So as I mentioned before, the typical the way that the hazardous substance tax and those toxics accounts are funded is through, based on the price per barrel of oil, and this is actually a screenshot from today. I just unfortunately I now have to be in the habit of tracking the price of crude oil. It's not something I am used to doing, but this is a screenshot of the past year of the price per barrel, and each one of those red stars represents approximately the point where the Department of Revenue and the state does a budget forecast. And you can see that as they start their budgeting process, just like we do, they were up here looking at what the fund was going to be able to have capacity-wise. The September forecast, that's about when Jim Pendowski came and started to talk to us and said, look, this has changed dramatically. We have made a decision to issue no new grants. And he apologized, said, I wish we could do something different, but as you can see, the fund rep forecast had dropped significantly if it's based on this. And then again, into January and February is about where it hit rock bottom. The price has started to go up. It has started to stabilize. I'm not an oil futures guy, so I don't know if this is going to change over time. But I think that the overall impression and the forecast indicate that it has stabilized, and it'll probably start to rebound over time as we go along. This was a significant issue that the ports, the cities, the counties, and actually a unified group of folks, including WPPA, the Working Waterfront Coalition, the Blue-Green Coalition, went down to Olympia and really strongly supported the establishment and reestablishment of the MODCA funding as a highest priority for the legislature for this supplemental budget, and it really it made a big difference. I think they heard us, the governor heard us, and the good news is that the supplemental budget did include a restacking and reallocating a significant amount of money towards the remedial action grants. Do you have a question, Commissioner?
Let's see. If I do the math right, at 0.007 cents a barrel at $100 a barrel, that's about 7 cents a barrel. Is that correct?
That's right. 0.7%. Yeah, so.
0.7 of a cent per barrel.
At $100 a barrel.
No, if a barrel of oil is $100.
You're right. Correct.
And it's 70 cents.
70 cents, okay. So at 70 cents a barrel, when it was $100, that was $300 million roughly. Now that it's close to $50 a barrel, you think it'd be $150 million that's there, but it's not. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. There's, and I am definitely not an economist, but I will do my best to fumble through this. What I have, the way I understand it is that it's not, and the way that the fund is used is not exclusively everything goes into this. Everything is collected from the hazardous substance tax, doesn't go straight into remedial action grants, and really what it does is funds a number of different things, and that's been, as Mr. Pendowski reminded us, that was a conscious decision by the legislature to take money out of the MODCA fund and put it towards things that were previously funded through the general fund, and there's a whole slew of things like that. So that even if that is the dollar amount, that doesn't mean that's what goes into all those toxics accounts. So that is correct, though. That the price, it is a 0.7% based on the price per.
So the current price being about $45, that's 31.5 cents, right? 0.7 of 1% of 45 is 31 cents.
Right. Yeah. At $50, yeah. Or thereabouts.
So this did, this is kind of a January 10th clipping from the Bellingham Herald. There was a ton of work done by the commission. There was letters to the editor or an editorial that the commission put together. It really did work, and the legislature heard everyone. And WPPA, Washington Public Ports Association, did a great job as well. So with that in mind, this one's a little bit hard for the folks in the audience to say, but I'll highlight a couple points here in a second. That the 2016 supplemental budget did include approximately $60 million in new funding. And that then also, though, accompanied...
60 million?
60 million. Is that what I said? Yeah. It was $60 million in funding that the legislature appropriated. But then along with that, they also required certain accounting guidelines to go along with that. So there are $60 million appropriated, but they have to manage their cash. So they have to continue, Department of Ecology continues to look at the price per barrel, look at the forecast, project what they really will have available. So they have to manage to their cash flow. So with that in mind, they developed this project list. That's also part of the legislative requirements, is that they have a list of factors that they develop on how to rank each individual project. And you'll see here, I captured one page of this because this is what the Port of Bellingham projects are on. This is number 13 up here. So down the list, there were 13 projects above that. And everything in this beige color here is funded. They think that based on their cash flow, that they will be able to fund all of the projects down to the 18th projects on the list. And as you'll see highlighted here in blue, the Port of Bellingham is funded for $6 million for the Harris Avenue shipyard. And that's a really significant amount. If you went up the list, the majority of the projects are about $1 million, $1.4 million. So a $6 million project for just the Port of Bellingham is fairly significant.
Do you have 1 through 13?
I have it here in a hard copy. I think I could grab for you.
I was just curious what those numbers were.
Yeah, I did look back, and really they all are right around 1 million, 1.2. There's nothing, I think, even over $2 million.
So we've really gotten our lion's share out of the Matka Fund.
We really did in this round, and there was a lot of work done by our delegation, Senator Erickson and Senator Ranker. They did a great job really fighting for our projects. There's also a really, really significant need for that project to be done. But then you also note here that this red line is the cutoff point, and the two next projects in line are Port of Bellingham projects as well. There's the Georgia Pacific Mill property where we have a $4 million ask, and then the 20th project is the Blaine Marina Tank Farm where we have about $1 million. It's $900,000, but about $1 million for cleanup at that project. Those are considered delayed because of their cash flow. If the cash flow changes, they just are going to go straight down the list and fund the projects. They're not going to be moving money around. They're not going to leapfrog projects. The idea is that they've been ranked, and they're going to go down the list and fund them as the money becomes available. So if the fund increases based on the price per oil, or if projects up above this don't happen, or they pull themselves out, that money will just go down the line. So we're right in a really good spot to potentially get another $5 million worth of funding for the GP West Side and the Blaine Marina Tank Farm. And then if that doesn't happen, we are also then going to be at the top of the list for the next biennium's projects. So I think that these two projects are really well positioned to be funded in the next round of funding either way.
So this ranking list will continue for the next round, is what you're saying, and our two projects, number 19 and 20, will be number 1 and 2? That's
how I understand it. That's correct. Yeah. There might be some changes if, like, for example, a project got pulled out for another reason, or if there's a new information that a project has a lot of problems that they would leapfrog because it was a new information that was, somehow came out since this list was made. But that would be my understanding. They would be at the top or close to it.
Thank you.
Does an emergency project that comes up that needs Matka funding, does it jump the list?
I don't know how they're going to do that. This is new. This ranking process is new. That was newly required by the legislature the last budget cycle. So I think we're all still getting used to how they do these rankings. If there is an emergency issue, I think that Ecology would support doing it. You might have to do something like retroactive funding, that kind of thing. They would, if there's an emergency, they would want to get it done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Brian, can you go back to that last slide? On the number 19, about 950,000 this project would be funded in 15-17. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's correct. So what that note is that the Department of Ecology anticipated they had about, if they just drew the line there, they would have about 950,000 in slush. So they were just say they put it down to the next project. So it was kind of a question mark right now because they hadn't done all of the math on that yet. And so they anticipated that they would have some money that would come to GP West even in this round.
And would we be able to transfer that to the Blaine instead, since that's 900? It seems like you could complete that project with those
I'd like to think so. There was a moratorium on moving money around between sites. So back to when I talked about how we were front-loading projects for a long time, and then the Whatcom Waterway project was delayed for quite a while. We actually did move money around between our existing grants. And when the fund crashed, they said, you can't do that anymore. In this case, that I think they would consider that because they're so closely ranked. The math works perfectly. Yeah. Any other questions on these?
Because that's what I was wondering.
So moving forward here then, this is the last slide I've got. Moving forward here, the immediate next steps is to get that $6 million under in a contract so we can really lock that in. We are working with our grant contracts managers right now, and we anticipate that we'll be given the green light to apply for that money here probably even next week. We have got actually a formal letter acknowledging that money is going to be made available to the Port of Bellingham, so that's great. On the other hand, the MOTCA funding is still going to be probably our one main priority for the next few legislative agendas. All the money that has been systematically taken out of those accounts is still set up that way. I think that's some structural changes that need to happen, and then also really looking at what the projection of our future projects looks like. That does include updating ecology every year with a required 10-year spending plan where we project forward what we think our spending is going to be. That's what they're supposed to be basing their budgeting on. And then really, the other thing we want to really explore here is some opportunities and options to build on the redevelopment opportunity zone concept that the commission approved and the city council as well, creating a brownfields redevelopment opportunity zone in the waterfront district. And that has some special legislative tools that could be explored, like potentially some grant-funded trusts where you could take grant funding, put it into a site-specific trust that could be used over multiple bienniums and doesn't subject to all these changes. And then also, in theory, anything in a brownfield redevelopment opportunity zone should get priority funding based on this ranking system that they have. So we want to push that one a little bit.
So, Brian, this particular property has garnered even national attention regarding the term brownfield and redevelopment and opportunity. How is this particular label any different than the other ones, none of which have stuck or been helpful?
This is a specific thing that along with that ELSA grant, when the ELSA in the 2013 MOTCA reform, Erickson and Ranker had multiple parts of this brownfield components. One of them was creation of this ELSA account. The other one were these brownfield tools. And this is part of that, this brownfields redevelopment opportunity zone. It might not provide us any benefit as far as marketing the properties, but it gives us a specific tool that we can take to the state and say, we're designated as this zone. Your law says that we have these tools that are available to us, like potentially setting up a trust, or we should get prioritization in the grant funding for the projects that fall within this geographic footprint. So it may not do anything, but it didn't take really a whole lot of effort for us to set that up. So we thought it would be really worth it, because why pass up on that opportunity? And the city also had a lot of interest in doing that because they have some cleanup sites in that area that require some significant effort as well.
Brian, are there any other ports that have as much in the hopper as we do to clean up?
There are some. The Port of Everett has a lot of work that they have to do. The Port of Seattle and the lower Duwamish area has a lot of significant work to do. Port of Anacortes already had kind of really jumped at this a few years ago and hit their projects really hard, got a lot of work done. I think that they've closed the books on quite a few of their projects already. But Everett, Seattle, Bellingham, those are the big ones. There's a few other river ports that have some smaller projects as well, but those are the big three. Tacoma as well, but they've got Yeah, I put Tacoma in there, of course, as well, yeah.
When you say Everett, Brian, does that include the old mill site upriver around the corner as part of the port or not?
I think so. Yeah, there's a number of a couple mill sites there, but there is one mill A site. I think it was a Weyerhaeuser site that they are really working on right now. The old Scott mill. I don't know if that's in their portfolio right now. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, I don't think
That was okay. Thanks.
Kimberly Clark, correct. Any other questions from the commission?
No.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. That was very, very informational.
And we're getting Brian back, or is Adam going to take this one?
We're
Tag teaming. All right. Fueling update on Blaine Harbor.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. 3 months ago, the Commission tasked the staff to investigate and explore the feasibility of reestablishing the fueling facility in Blaine Harbor. 1 month ago, the Commission heard staff's initial findings and also an associated presentation from Semiahmoo Harbor, also on fueling. In the staff's initial investigation, there were significant and pivotal assumptions that staff recommended, and Commission agreed and directed staff to explore those further. And specifically, the Commission asked whether or not a secondary containment system would be required to reestablish that fueling station. So in today's presentation, what you'll hear are the results of those that further exploration, revised cost estimate reflecting the findings, MOTCA considerations on that site, and then finally a revised overall financial model for the reestablishment of that fueling facility. So to begin with, would a secondary containment system be required? And the answer to that is yes. How much would it cost? We think it would add about $81,000 to the previously presented total of $113,000, making our total investment about $194,000. How do we know? It will be the permitting process, and in both in the staff's estimate and an independent estimate performed by Ultratank Services, presented by Doug Carlberg. Both of our estimates were very close, and both estimates made the assumption that the permitting picture could wreak havoc on the project essentially, and could introduce requirements that would be expensive. And that is, in fact, the case. Here are the 4 of the 5 permits that are required from the City of Blaine: is the Shoreline Substantial Development Permit, also from Blaine, the Mechanical Permit. Third from Blaine is their, of course, business license, which is actually administered through the state, but it is a City of Blaine business license. And then, kind of interestingly, from the Department of Agriculture, Weights and Measures, is this liquid fuel meter license, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to explore. It's sort of like, how do you know you're getting a gallon of gas when you buy a gallon of gas? It's a regulated metering system. It's this 5th permit that really initiates investigation of the site, and that is, of course, the Washington State Business License in this SIC code, the Standard Industrial Classification Code, which any business gets. You can see we'd be in the Major Group 55, Industrial Group 5541 for marine service stations, retail. And my understanding is the way, maybe not news to anyone besides myself, but the way these SIC codes work is they become a trigger for and a communication tool for the agencies to communicate to each other what businesses exist in their state. So, for instance, if you had a restaurant, then your SIC code would indicate that, and that would then be manifolded down to the health department, for instance, that would want to investigate your restaurant. Similarly, for a contractor, it would be funneled then over to OSHA to see that you have a safe practicing contractor. Similarly, with owning a marine fueling station, there are a couple agencies that would be triggered by that SIC code, one being the Department of Ecology, the other being the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Both of those, as you can see here, would be referring to WAC 173, 180. Underlined in red, you can see that above ground oil storage tanks must be located within secondary containment areas, maintained and operated to prevent discharged oil from entering the waters of the state. And further down into the definition of that secondary containment is sufficiently contained and readily recoverable, the fuel. That we are perched on a MOTCA site that is the product of impacted or leaks from that facility is probably the most solid indication that we do not have, that we are not sufficiently contained, nor is the product, the oil, readily recoverable, and thus why we have an impacted site. It's also this spill prevention control and countermeasure plan, the SPCC on the very bottom line there, that will require a secondary containment system. So we have a lot of confidence that a secondary containment system will be required. I added this number then to my estimate, having supported it in estimating what would be required to line the inside of those concrete walls. And then again, the 44,000, when you ratchet up doing some design and putting tax on it and contractor costs, et cetera, it's about an $80,000 addition to the project. Before we move on to the MOTCA considerations, do the commissioners have any questions on the requirement for secondary containment?
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked the question if MOTCA money would move, emergencies would move up, there's some spilling of some kind taking place in Blaine Harbor now. My concern was if they say that's that tank, would it move from those tanks or history of those tanks, would that move up in the MOTCA funding? And I guess the answer was we really don't know.
Thank you. The commissioner's concerns are well-founded, and I would ask Director Gowron to address the MOTCA considerations of that site. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for your presentation.
All right, thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowan, Director of Environmental Programs. And tagging on to Adam's discussion here, I was going to put a little bit of context and background. We talked about it a little bit already here in the previous discussion, and I'll get to your question there, Commissioner Robbins, in a moment here. But I was just going to give a little bit of background on the MOTCA cleanup site components of this facility. So this is, as we know, this is a state-listed MOTCA cleanup site. It's been under investigation for quite a while. We've known about it, and we actually entered into an agreed order with the Department of Ecology in 2012, where we entered into this legal agreement where we agreed to perform a couple of actions. One of them is to do a full site RIFS, or Remedial Investigation and Feasibility Study, and that's where we do a lot of investigation, look for where we found impacts, whether soil, groundwater, sediment, surface water have been impacted, evaluate really the site conditions. And then the feasibility study says, okay, given that information, what can you do about it and how much is it going to cost? And there's a range of alternatives that are put together into the feasibility study that then defines, what the cleanup action would be. So the agreed order covered the performance of a remedial investigation and feasibility study, as well as conducting an interim action. And that was where we installed a sheet pile wall along a failing bulkhead where the fuel lines actually came out, and there was a concern that this failing dock and bulkhead would potentially pull the lines apart and have a catastrophic spill into Drayton Harbor there and into Blaine Harbor. And so we did this interim action where we installed the sheet pile wall, and that's when those new pipes were actually installed, because it was at that time an operating fueling facility, and they replaced the distribution lines under the road and in that little stretch where it went from the sheet pile wall back towards the fueling facility. And then the draft RFS was actually finalized and approved. It went out for public comment about a year ago. And then that was about where the point where we had our MODCA crisis, our funding crisis, where the money started drying up. We were right at the cusp of this, of developing a cleanup action plan. So the sequence of cleanup process is you do the RIFS, and then you develop a draft cleanup action plan, and that's Ecology's document that says, okay, here is the cleanup. Here's what you're going to do. And that's actually Ecology's document. We often assist in the development of that, but that's the Ecology document that then gets coupled with a second legal agreement, whether it's an agreed order or a consent decree that then is the court order to do the cleanup. And so I'll talk just a little bit about that as well as a little bit of background. So we are actually at the phase where we have a draft cleanup action plan that's under review, and that we've gotten comments back from the Department of Ecology on that one as well. And then we also have a little bit of new information on this recent shoreline sheen that Commissioner Robbins mentioned. So just in a way of background here are some of the conditions that have led to the current contamination at the site. Not a big surprise. This was an operation of a facility prior to the current environmental regulations. It was operated from the 1950s until just recently. A number of small leaks, drips, spills from these fittings, as well as at least 2 or 3 relatively large spills that ranged from anywhere from 500 to 8,000 gallons of spills. So that's a significant amount of material that was discharged in and around this fueling facility. Some of that was recovered. That wasn't all just soaked into the ground. But as Adam had indicated, there's not a currently aligned containment facility there. It kept it from flowing out and into the bay, but it didn't prevent material from soaking into the ground in and around the tanks. And you can see here again, a lot of little small drips and fittings and things that had leaked over time and just have created these conditions that we're now addressing in the RIFS and the cleanup action. So during the investigation, what we do oftentimes is kind of put the cleanup scenario or the conditions into a cartoon here. And this is a cross-section cartoon that shows, the above ground storage tanks here, the containment unit, and how material had soaked in. There's some low permeability clay material. There's also a lot of permeable sand there that allows material to flow through. And this is called LNAPL, or non-aqueous phase liquid, light non-aqueous phase liquid, that will actually be free product that will float on the groundwater. And as the tide comes up and down, it smears that product up and down in the ground. It also then contaminates the groundwater potentially that can flow out to Blaine Harbor. So that's kind of the cross-section cartoon that shows, why we have to clean up what we can't see from the surface, but this shows what we found during our investigations. And here's a top-down map view of the cleanup. I'll explain this. It's a little hard to follow if you're not familiar with these types of maps. But this is the actual selected site cleanup, and this is looking down onto the site. This is the actual building outlined in black. Here are the tanks. This is the kind of containment unit or area. This is the shoreline, and this is this sheet pile wall that from about here down is the sheet pile wall that we installed in the interim action. So the actual cleanup anticipates that the outline in red here is where we have known impacts of petroleum impacts in and around the facility. We anticipate that in this orangish line here that all of that would be excavated out to down to about 12 feet below the ground surface. So the tanks would be removed. Maybe I could use the annotator here. I don't know if that'll work better. Yeah. So the tanks here would be moved. This area in and around here, that would all be excavated down to about 12 feet below the ground surface. Another sheet pile wall would be installed all along this edge, just to extend that sheet pile wall, because the groundwater obviously flows from here out towards the bay. And then these green...
Excuse me, yeah. Brian, would that mean they would go deeper, or in addition to the sheet pile?
It would extend the sheet pile wall. So it stopped about right here, the interim action sheet pile wall.
Or you'd extend it wider.
Yeah, we'd extend it further north, yeah.
Thank you.
Correct. And then these green lines are actually injection points where we would inject we've kind of joke about how sometimes people come and say they have bugs that can cure and fix anything. This actually is one where we can inject some different products, including bioremediation components. So there are some bugs that you inject that actually degrade the petroleum, and they've been tested to be used in these conditions and they work really well. So it actually would help the dissolved phase contamination and the dissolved groundwater contaminants. And so there would be an injection of this over time, and it would be slowly released, and as the groundwater flowed through and around that, those contaminants would be monitored to make sure that they're being reduced over time. And that reduces the amount of footprint that you have to excavate, because the excavation and removal is really to get that LNAPL, that product, out of the ground. But as you can see, that you'd also have to potentially, you'd have to definitely demolish the tanks. And then actually we anticipate that this excavation would probably come out into the building a bit, so we also have anticipated removing that entire structure as well of the building. I know there's current tenants there. We'd be working with real estate on that, and that is something we could potentially do in phases, but the current plan would be to remove that building as well. So that's the current cleanup approach. This is the new information that we have here as well, and this is a petroleum sheen that we've observed occurring at certain tide cycles that we have not clearly identified the source, but it makes a lot of sense that, as you can see in the background here are the tanks, and the groundwater does flow towards the bay. And we've done some preliminary investigation along the shoreline. It looks like there is a potential. The actual sheet pile wall that we installed stopped about right there. So we anticipate that this is a potential source, that there's contaminants migrating, towards the bay. There are other potential sources in and around there that we could look at, but we have done some preliminary field investigation. Ben Howard, our new environmental project manager, has been up there over the past few days and has looked around and looked at low tide, and it does appear that there are petroleum impacts coming from the shoreline there. So in that scenario, we have notified ecology and we're working with them closely, but this is one where it does look like it probably warrants an escalation of work and moving this forward as a priority cleanup project in and around this area.
Brian, there were two other fueling locations up there, a total of 3 at one time, I'm told. Where were those?
I'd like to get back to you on that one. I don't know right off the top of my head. I know that there was a Texaco facility, but that might have just been a barge offload facility that went along kind of Blaine Marina Drive there.
Were they located near this?
I don't know the honest answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I could get back to you though.
No worries.
And so with that in mind, then this is this goes back to one of my last slides actually. And you can see that's the grant funding scenario that we had. We had looked at the red line is the cutoff line for where we currently have funded, but the next two projects, and I've highlighted in this case, the bottom project was the Blaine Marina project. And if we do accelerate this, we do have existing funding to go to the next phase of work, to go into design. We have, I think I said $250,000, which is about $500,000 worth of cleanup that we could start designing, working on finalizing the cleanup action plan and really getting this project out to bid so we can actually have it ready for actual construction work, with the anticipation that within the next year at a minimum, we would have this new $900,000 from the Department of Ecology as well. So if we choose not to do that and we do restart this fueling facility, we would be in that scenario where we'd have to basically take this project off the list and say, this project is probably going to be delayed, unless, of course, ecology mandates that we do it, which they haven't yet, that we would delay it, and then that $900,000 would potentially be moved to the next project down the list. So that's another consideration as we make this decision on the restarting of the fueling facility. And with that, that summarizes my part. The next few slides have kind of the overall pro forma. Rob, were you going to take that one? Okay, and I can forward these as we go along if you wanted to.
So this is stuff you've reviewed before. We did the assumption of 80,000 gallons, 80% diesel, 20% clear, 7-day-a-week operation. You can go to the next one because all this has been seen before. The only thing we've done here is update the capital costs. So the old capital costs were just over $100,000. Now we're at $194. You can see how we get there between the pumps and the tank lining. We still have labor is the same assumption where we're going existing staff November through April, seasonal staff May through October. We'd adjust that as being needed, of course. And then you get to the markup, which is 70 cents. We believe that's the markup we need to be competitive to sell our fuel, and yet will get us the best volume sales. And we end up with a cash flow of a negative $18,000 on the 70-cent model. If you wanted to look at it from a break-even perspective, you would either have to go to a $1.44 markup, or instead of selling 80,000 gallons, you would have to sell 180,000 gallons. Does that make sense, how we laid that out there in those three columns? Payroll stays constant. Again, that could go up or down. I could see that going down pretty easily by $10,000 if we find we can do it with our existing staff. Depreciation is a non-cash item. That's why I don't think the 56 is too big of a deal. And then, so you add that back and you get to that negative $18,000 cash flow on your $200,000 investment. Here's a survey we've done of other port-related or on-water fueling operations and how we would stack up against that. You can see that everyone's at right around that, the low being 266 and and the high being 316 at Point Roberts.
With that
That's the
slide,
last
can we
one.
keep that slide? Where does the proposed charge fall on this chart for Blaine?
So go back to the previous slide. The 70-cent markup would be on top of our cost. I don't remember what the assumption was for the cost in here.
So it'd be 70 cents above the rack price they charge?
Correct. That's right. And I believe that was, when we looked at this a month or two ago, it was like $1.44, $1.66, something in there. I remember it being an even couple numbers like that, but at the top of my head, I don't recall exactly what that is.
That would be the purchase price per gallon?
That's what we would sell it for.
So
Above
We'd
what we
70 cents plus that, whatever that rack
go to
price
the next
is.
slide then, last slide?
Yep.
So you'd be 70 cents plus $1.60 is 240, 230?
So that can't be right. So that $1.44 has probably come up.
This is already,
So when we looked at this 2 months ago, obviously fuel was less. This was done as of March 31st. And what I don't have is what the rack price was on March 31st. And is Bob going to get that? Yes. Okay, so we're going to get that for you. We should have put that in here. I'm sorry. So it'd be the rack price plus 70 is whatever our number is in here for regular gas. Any other questions while we're waiting for that?
A question for Adam. You said that the permits could wreak havoc on this process, but not to be pejorative of Mr. Dodd. I mean, he's a relatively unsophisticated small operator and managed the permit process, seemingly okay. Why do you think it would be problematic for the port to manage the same processes?
Well, I think it's the grandfathering clause. I think he operated for a long time, and honestly, even the irony is even the port was on him about getting his facilities up to date. For us, two things would happen. One is we're doing a brand new license, so it's going to meet today's code. And second of all, we're the Port of Bellingham. I mean, we are the government. We should be doing things right.
So, as part of the conversation regarding the Blaine Marine Industrial Area, we did anticipate adding a fuel location somewhere on the properties in the harbor. Maybe not this location, but somewhere. Those issues would still be the exact same issues regardless of whether it was at this location or a different location. Is that right?
The issues would still be the same.
Other than the
Secondary
cleanup
containment would be required. All those same permits I listed out would be required. What would be different about a different site would be all of Brian's Motka considerations that $1 million would go away. But the other thing that would actually make a different site quite different is that today's tanks have their own built-in secondary containment, so they're a double wall tank. And so it's a less expensive situation than today's, or I'm sorry, this facility where you've got this concrete walls that you got to pull the tanks and prepare the ground and put in a lining and all this sort of thing.
Adam, are the Dodds on the hook, or their insurance company or anything on any of this cleanup?
Frank asked that.
The Dodds were on the hook and still legally are as former owners and operators of the facility. Unfortunately, early on, before the port really got to the Dodds, Safeco gave them $50,000 and received a release. That was their historic insurance carrier. And unfortunately, the Dodds didn't tell us about that. We took that money and put it into a escrow account, which we spend off of as we need the money. But without talking to us first, I think it's fair to say, in fairness to them, it was back before people really understood how this worked. Safeco got an extraordinarily good deal when they paid $50,000 to the Dodds.
So what you're saying is that there's no insurance company that the port can approach to help pay for the cleanup?
There is no insurance company the port can approach that can help pay for the cleanup, correct, related to the Dodds. We're continually looking around for other carriers, but right.
Are they personally on the hook for any of this?
They are personally on the hook under the Model Toxics Control Act. Owners, operators, generators, and transporters are on the hook. And if you have a corporation, for example, but you make the decisions yourself about what fuel to buy, how to pump it, then you're personally liable as well. So yes, they are personally on the hook, but that then becomes a commission policy decision.
Once, if we were to take over those tanks, does that let them off the hook?
No.
Thank you.
So, Bob, did you told me 186 for regular? For diesel and $3.12 for regular gas. So, yeah. So the 312 does not include our markup?
The 312 does include our 70-cent markup.
Sorry, there you go. So 312 compared to, we'd be the second high on this list next to 316. And then the diesel obviously also includes our markup at $1.86.
Right. It was based on the delivered price to the port to Blaine plus our markup.
Okay. So we'd be the second low on diesel and the second high on regular gas.
At today's price?
Yeah, 186 on diesel and 312 on regular. This was on March 31st, so it's a little over a month old now.
So the numbers that you're using are based on reusing the existing tanks?
Correct. The 200,000, give or take, is based on reusing existing tanks and putting in new secondary confinement.
And Adam, you said that new tanks would be cheaper, but the whole project may not be cheaper. That's my words. Those are my words.
It would be a separate investigation and estimate to figure that out. But there's just other options. If you move the facility, other options become available. So it may or may not be less expensive. It's just so site dependent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a quick question, Adam. The new tanks you spoke to that are have self-containment in them, those above ground tanks?
Yes.
And so if you were to set in that, just for instance, we put tanks in the same area, it was cleaned up, we did the MACA thing, clean up, we set those type of tanks there, do we have to have a concrete containment under those tanks that are there also?
No.
Or is their tanks are considered the containment?
My understanding is that those tanks themselves are their own secondary containment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just a fair warning, there are actually engineers that make their whole living in this industry, and so I don't pretend to be an expert in this little research.
You're doing quite well.
In this pricing that you have here with Samiamo, does that include the discount they were going to give us?
Well, it's the price they gave us on March 31st that any Blaine boater would be able to get. Yeah, any one of our Blaine customers could get that.
It includes that discount?
Correct.
I think that was the published price for Samiamu on that date. I think that was actually before we spoke with them at the meeting here.
So it doesn't include the discount they offered?
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah, I didn't think it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Is that discount, though, available and put in place? I mean, if you're a Blaine boater at the Blaine Marina and you go over to buy gas,
They made it available. They said at the meeting they'd make it not only for Blaine, but also for Bellingham, if I remember correctly.
I believe you're right, Commissioner Robbins. I believe they said that.
All right, anything further?
No.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And we're at our 5 o'clock break, so we will do that now and reconvene at 5:30, and starting with the public comment period. 5:30. We are going to start the second half of our meeting now. And per the usual, we will start with our public comment. Does anybody signed up?
No, no one has signed up.
All right. Scott, feel free to step up to them. Yeah. And if anybody else is here that wants to speak, just follow Scott.
Hello, folks. My name is Scott Sanderson. Thank you. I spoke with a few other people today that have the same concern that I do, that the second building referred to here as far as Harcourt Developing would be the board mill building. Is that correct?
That's up to Harcourt. The current thinking is it's the board mill building, but Harcourt could come with another building and use that as their second project.
Okay. Well, the concern that I had heard expressed, or what I was asked to speak to today, was the board mill building is something that was considered part of Western Crossing originally. And that there were, to put a facility like that there's a lot of planning that would need to take place, a lot of approvals made prior to that building being developed into anything, let alone something like a low-hanging fruit is what they're calling it, okay? So as far as extending the permit and I'm giving them a blank slate, I and other parties don't believe that you should extend that at this time until there's more discussion and the public has had more chance to put input in. That's basically all I have to say.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You had a question?
Can you clarify? So what you're saying is you want us to wait on moving to 6 months? I'm not quite clear on exactly what you want.
All right, it's in that you want to extend the timing for completion, submittal of the building permit. And I have people that have asked me that couldn't be here today that said they're hoping that you wouldn't do that you would not extend that at this time. That's bottom line.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Any further public comment at this time? Okay, we are going to move into our action items. There are some folks here regarding the All-American Marine Manufacturing Facility. It's action item number 3. We're going to move that up front, so we're going to take item 3 first. And Diana will read a resolution.
Yes. A motion to authorize the executive director to execute a contract with RAM Construction Incorporated of Bellingham, Washington for the All-American Marine, or AAM, manufacturing facility in the amount of $8,873,713, plus a 5% contingency for a total authorized contract amount of $9,317,000.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Gibson, project engineer. I have the privilege of introducing the All-American Marine Manufacturing Facility. We went out for bid for this in April. We received 5 bids. Our lowest responsible bidder was RAM Construction of Bellingham. Their bid amount was $8,873,000, and this was actually approximately 7% below our engineer's estimate, so a very nice place to land. Another interesting point about this is that the 4 lowest bids were within about 20% of each other, and we're always encouraged to see that. That means that all the different contractors were looking at the same set of drawings. They kind of understood what was happening. Very competitive group. There was a 5th one that was a bit of an outlier, but that's bound to happen. So overall, Port staff was very happy with the way that this bid turned out, and we're happy to see that it's within budget. Just a little bit of background here. As you all remember, All-American Marine is a tenant of the port. They are a business that have been here in Bellingham since 1987. They manufacture state-of-the-art aluminum catamarans. They actually have an exclusive design agreement with a designer out of New Zealand. But they're currently employing about 50 skilled tradespeople, and we're excited to know that this new facility could open up the door for a lot more jobs like that. The current facility in Fairhaven was actually getting too small for their needs, and that was the impetus for this new building. Initially, the idea was to put the new facility in Fairhaven, and this was actually all before I got hired in November. But eventually the design team and the tenants realized that a great opportunity lay right out the door here on Hilton Avenue. As you can see, we've got all kinds of wide open space. It's close to the water. There's plenty of room to grow in the future. There's easy access for any delivery trucks coming to and from the building. And if you contrast that with the site down in Fairhaven, it's a pretty stark contrast. It's very tight space. It would have been difficult to get everything we needed to within that space. And the other advantage of the new location is that it actually expands the port's real estate holdings as far as usable space that could be leased out. First phase of this project is actually going to be transferring that big hill of material that you see every time you drive by. There's about 46,000 cubic yards, and that was excavated from the nearby Bellwether development. It's been tested. Department of Ecology has approved it for transfer to the Cornwall landfill site. So in a way, this is sort of a win-win situation. We get to prepare our site for this building, but we can also complete a landfill capping exercise over at Cornwall. This is just a quick overview of the basic layout of the site and the building. We've got Hilton Avenue and Roeder Avenue. The main manufacturing bays are in that purple section. That's about 37,000 square feet. And then you've got some ancillary buildings with the offices and shipping and receiving and materials processing. So trucks will be able to come in off Roeder Avenue, come through here, and actually pull all the way through the building. The cranes would be able to offload material, and then the trucks could depart through here. When ships are ready to launch, we'll be able to bring them out of these huge sliding doors and take them north. And I'll get back to that in a few minutes. This is just a quick shot of the building elevations. The architects picked out a pretty attractive color scheme. It's got a few extra features on it just to enhance the aesthetics. Over on the left, you can see that we've got the office spaces, and then we've got a hangar style door and then a sliding door here. So this gives access to the manufacturing bays, and the boats would be pulled out of here on dollies. One interesting thing that came up during the initial design was that we were having the building designed to match Hilton Avenue. And after looking at that, Adam Fulton actually pointed out that there would be a real savings if we were to lift the entire building up about 2.5 feet. That would reduce the amount of excavation that we needed to do, and it would reduce the amount of reduce the amount of fill material that we need to bring back in. And so what you're going to see as the construction starts is that the road is actually going to tie in right here at Roeder Avenue with that existing grade. And then it's all going to be lifted up as much as 2.5 feet. That's what these profiles are showing down here. The blue line is the existing grade. The red line is the proposed grade. So up on this end, you'll match the existing, you'll stay high, and then at the edge of the project, it will dip back down and smoothly taper back into the existing grade. So in future projects, these sections of road could also be lifted up. I think the advantage to this is that it sets the path for future projects on this site so that more of them can be put in at this higher elevation, and you won't be placing the buildings in potentially contaminated material. So kudos to Adam for recognizing that opportunity. This next slide shows when the vessels are complete, they would be rolled out of these bays here across Hilton Avenue. This would be a staging yard for the manufacturer. The vessels would be on dollies towed by a heavy truck. and it would be pushed cross-country along that orange route all the way across Bellwether Way, across the Squalica Marina parking lot, and down through the boat launch. At that point, the vessels would be towed back to the I&J waterway, where a fit-up float would be prepared for them to have their final configuration. This is a rough breakdown of the schedule for this project. Assuming that we're able to get approval from tonight's meeting, we'd like to issue notice to proceed for the contractor within about 2 weeks. And then they have 215 calendar days to complete the contract. So that puts us into the middle of December, and then the final completion at the end of December. All-American Marine has indicated that they could have boats ready to launch as soon as May. And at that time, we would be able to use the Squalica boat launch. Further on down the road, we would need to complete the I&J waterway fit-up float. And as you can see, we've got that scheduled for the 2017-2018 in-water work window. But we've already got the plan started for that work. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions I can answer for the commission?
I have a couple. You spoke about raising the level of the road. What's the time frame on that? What time of the year are you considering doing that for, and the consideration for disruption for Borenstein's and the other businesses down the road who have a lot of semi trucks coming in and out to move product, especially in the summertime?
Yeah, that's a great point, and we would want to make sure to collaborate closely with them to make sure that they had free access through that site. Fortunately, as you could see, there's wide open space to the north, and so I'm quite optimistic that we could keep an open path for them.
Okay, because there'll be a cost involved with that when you're running the semis across even the wide open space to the north. You just can't drive across the. So we're gonna have groundwork involved there. One other thing that it kind of comes to mind is when we've discussed taking your vessels all the way across over the boat launches. I don't know if it's something feasible we can look into is a ramp right at the I&J there inside of where your float would be for your vessels, and it with a swing away float, and you can roll the vessel right into the water there. I mean, if that's something that we can maybe not right now, but in the future we can do, so we don't have to go all the way across through everything to the boat launches, which would make it close. What's that?
It's pretty steep.
Right. Well, that's what I said. I wonder if we could come back with a ramp to facilitate putting your vessels in right there at your site instead of having to go across.
And as I understand it, Commissioner Briscoe, those options were considered early on. Adam, I think you considered 4 or 5 different scenarios for launching that boat. Would you mind speaking to that?
Not at all. Thank you. We would consider looking at that closer. We're in the process of permitting the fit-up float there in the I&J. There's a couple of significant issues with creating a new boat launch in the I&J waterway. One is we don't own the property. It's owned by the Department of Natural Resources. And the second is just the permit process itself. It may end up being the ultimate long-term solution for it, but our time frame is such that we needed to get something sooner.
No, I fully understand that, Adam.
Yeah.
I want to keep that going so that if we can keep it closer to their facility for them.
Yeah.
I know it takes a long time to get that.
It really does.
So.
And then a third consideration is there's also actually a slated park in that area that we have agreement with the city on, and square footage of the parks, et cetera. It's complicated, but all to say is I think it could be preserved as a longer term option.
Yeah.
So I would like to jump in on that point. So Commissioner Briscoe recently learned about a launching method using large bladders. You can slide them under a vessel that's in the dirt, so to speak. They're used a lot in salvage. You pump it up and then they roll. But I don't know, since you brought that up earlier, I didn't think about this. I don't know that you could do that and have the fit-up float in the same general vicinity. I think you're going to run right up against Borenstein's at that point if you try to do both of those. Because you need a launch area long enough for that ramp.
Can you
and
go
boat.
back to the other picture there that shows, let's see, where are we? There we go.
Yeah, maybe it'd work.
There, thank you.
Well, thinking outside the
But we'll have a
box,
depth, though. I think we have a depth issue, too.
thinking outside the box, you can remove that float. Well, while you would launch, you would remove the float. Put the float back after the vessel's in the water.
Theoretically, yeah.
Anyways, just a question to keep, a thought to keep in mind for the future of an easier access for the folks at All American Marine to get their vessels in the water right there.
I think Commissioner Briscoe just wants to buy a big rubber,
Yeah, big rubber tires.
whatever it is. I don't know what you call those things. They're cool to watch, though. Do you have any questions? I don't believe I have any questions. I think we've talked about this quite a bit. Oh, no, I do. We have to account for the road construction in some portion of this project. Where is that, and how much does that cost?
That cost around $300,000, and that was included as Schedule C of the bid. I think it's included with your bid packet.
Okay, so that's that was part of the project, and it still came in under expected price.
Correct.
Well, all right.
Did the original engineer's estimate include excavating and getting rid of that dirty contaminated materials, and part of the savings is because we're elevating the road?
Correct. Commissioners, if I could add to the being under budget. Terry Elahi, Real Estate Representative. We will be currently under budget for this particular project. There's one thing that you need to be aware of. The port did agree to do the site preparation costs. Those costs have gone slightly higher than what we had initially anticipated for this particular site. Most of those costs were derived from the Fairhaven site and then changed accordingly. So our side of the ledger may be slightly higher at the end of the day, but overall for the total project, this certainly falls within budget.
Well, I think one of those would have been just moving the soils. That over in Fairhaven, we wouldn't have had that. Anything further?
Between the area being 2 feet higher and the dredging and the spoils that are going to go over to the Cornwall site, will there be any dredging left over after that?
If I understand the question properly, there will be some spoils left over when we've finished preparing for the building. And what's happened there is we've asked, we want to only remove as much soil as necessary to excavate and haul off the site. Another advantage to this is that because of the underlying material being used, or it's potentially contaminated with heavy metals and as a previous landfill. And so we were very eager to find ways not to dig into that soil. And that was another reason to keep the building as high as possible, 2.5 feet higher than the original design. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was just curious if there's going to be more than's left there and more than goes over to Cornwall. Will there be more? And if so, where's that going?
No. We're taking as much as possible from that site and taking it to Cornwall because Brian Gowron and his cohorts in the Environmental Division can use every cubic yard of it for their capping.
Oh, okay, so.
Yeah, everything we can take over there, we will, because they need it all.
Oh, okay.
And they're still going to be importing to finish their work.
Okay, so there won't be any left over. That was my question.
Commissioner's correct.
Thank you.
And to be clear on the contaminated soils, that's part of the original fill for the site. This is not from the dredge that was added on top of that, which is what will be moved.
Right, that's correct. That's from a previous operation.
Not dredge. That was from the construction of the Bellwether garage, right?
Right, which was actually originally dredge material from Squalicum Harbor, though.
Yeah.
So you were right both times.
It was dredged.
An air dry.
It's on its third final move. However, pretty clean, though, because it's Nooksack silt.
Correct, yeah, it's very clean. We tested it, and we went through a lot of work with the Department of Ecology to make sure that they approved of it. There were some extremely low-level detections of contaminants, which you'd find anywhere, but I mean, it's clean enough that I would put it in my backyard and garden in it, yep.
Okay, super, all right.
With the micro things to you.
Yeah, with the bioremediation or after the bioremediation? Yeah. Anything further?
That's a question.
Somebody has a question? Oh, yes, ma'am, here's a question. 1 second, we're going to get you on the microphone, Elizabeth.
I'm curious what's going to happen with the trail that goes around there that hooks up to the ASB, the new park thing.
Great question. The trail is going to remain just as it is right now. That includes, let me just back up to a different slide so I can show you. Just for everyone's information, the trail that our visitor is referring to runs from the ASB up in here, through here, down along the I&J waterway, and then connects up to Bellwether Way. So that will remain intact, and there will be some landscaping along this area so that that can be a buffer for the view. Does that answer your question?
I'm good.
Yeah, it's a nice one. Yeah, I use it often myself.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, hearing nothing further from the commission, we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, let's roll. Woohoo. All right.
Thank you.
See some groundbreaking happening. So I think we're going to action item number 1 now regarding a pier in Blaine.
A motion to adopt Resolution 1352 renaming the Blaine End Pier as the Jorgensen Pier and expressing commission commitment to work cooperatively with the City of Blaine to restore public access to the Jorgensen Pier.
All right, Sylvia.
Hi, Sylvia Goodwin, Planning Director. We've been talking about this project for some time, and this is just formalizing a decision you've already discussed several times to rename the pier as the Jorgensen Pier. Jim has been a strong advocate of restoring public access to that pier for a long time. We've discussed this previously, and this is just formalizing it. The next step, we didn't have a lot of fanfare tonight. What we were thinking is that once we get the pier open to the public and we can actually all walk or drive out there, we'll put up some type of a sign and maybe we'll have some kind of a little more fanfare now. But this is just formalizing the decision that you've already discussed.
All right. Got anything on this? No? Bonnie? Wow, yeah, I kind of was hoping for fanfare.
Yeah.
Lots of bling. You wanted more bling?
We thought we'd do fanfare. We can put some sort of plaque out there and get the road open and really have a nice little...
I want to see Jim jump off of the pier. We'll cover the no jumping sign.
So maybe we can all drive out and we'll have Jim walk out? Or
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There you go. All right, this one's moving ahead. Thank you very much, Sylvia. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All right, very cool. And we will be expecting fanfare in the near future. Thank you very much. All right, we are moving on to action item number 2. And Diane, please.
A motion authorizing the executive director to execute amendment number 2, revising Exhibit 4.1 of the Master Development Agreement with Harcourt Bellingham LLC to extend the timing for completion and submittal of a building permit for the second building project by 6 months.
Sylvia Goodwin again, Sylvia, Planning and Development Director. This is an amendment to the agreement with Harcourt to, as Diane said, extend the deadline for the second building permit by 6 months. The agreement was entered into by the Port and Harcourt in May of 2015, and that's for 18.8 acres. And there were a number of milestones and timelines included in Exhibit 4.1 to that first agreement. The first of which was to get the granary building permit submitted, and that has been done. And the Harcourt is just presently getting ready to get a contractor out to begin construction on that first building. Following that, there's a provision that the second building permit needs to be submitted by May 19th, 2016. That would be in a couple of weeks from now. When we entered into that agreement, we did not know or contemplate that the second building they were projecting to do is the board mill building. The board mill building, as a citizen suggested earlier today, is within the Harcourt, or the Western Crossing boundary. And we're having a meeting tomorrow with Western Crossing to talk about changing that boundary, because Harcourt would like to develop the board mill building. The board mill building is a historic building within the waterfront district sub-area plan. It was identified as a building that we should strongly consider adaptive reuse. It is actually one of the only buildings that has windows, doors, floors, and is suitable for reuse. That and the granary building and the alcohol plant are the three really that were identified as having potential. So with a developer interested in it, we felt it would be worth extending the deadline for 6 months to give them time to get the design completed and the complete building permit submitted. They would still be obligated to complete the building within 4 years, which would be by 2021, and they believe that they can do it much faster than that. So if we extend the deadline to get the application in, that doesn't mean we're necessarily extending the deadline for completing the building. So staff recommendation is to adopt this amendment. Questions?
Will they be buying the building?
They will be buying the building. Assuming that the board mill is the second building, we have a land lease, a land purchase rate already established in the master development agreement, and we need to negotiate the cost or the value of the building itself. In the case of the granary building, we didn't assign any value to the granary building. The board mill building is in fairly workable shape, so it has some value, and we don't know what that value is yet. We'll be working on that.
Wish Mr. Sanderson was here still, the citizen that spoke. I didn't quite understand their opposition to extending for 6 months. Did anybody here quite grasp what he was getting at?
I didn't. I was a little confused because we're extending, just so everyone's clear, what we're extending here is their deadline to apply for a permit. We're not extending their deadline to start construction or their deadline to complete the building. So
That's the way I read it. I was confused if he was against getting into the Western Crossing area or just extending periods. So I thought maybe someone else in the audience might have grasped a little more further what he was
The amendment itself is just to extend the deadline. The amendment does not ensure or decide one way or the other whether the second building will be the board mill building or whether it will be a different building. That will come back to the commission later. If and when they get a proposal in, then we negotiate the purchase price. We'll bring it to commission for further decision. If the commission decides you don't want the board mill building to be the second building, you still have that option at that time, and they could build a different building. They've talked about several other options for a building, but what they really want is to start with the board mill building and have the two historic buildings on the site refurbished and open for use before they start another building that is just raw land.
Thank you, Sylvia.
So this particular issue has given me a little consternation the last couple of weeks, and mostly surrounding the reason for the extension. So when we let this deal go forward with Harcourt, there was a certain amount of land that was available for their use, and they had a year to come up with a plan for a second building. And instead of moving forward with a plan for a second building, they set their sights on the board mill building. And because they don't have any plan that they can share regarding the board mill building, they now need an extension on the timing of their permit to get the second building going. And the way I look at it is they chose not to move forward on the second building that we discussed when we let the process go, which was a building that was pretty close to the original granary, right? So everything that I remember discussing then showed the granary and then a building of some sort, some certain square footage, and it was relatively close to the granary building. But instead of moving forward on that, they took that off their table and decided to move forward with something that we hadn't even discussed at all. It was outside of the land that we made available to them, and also required a complete reconstruct of the agreement we have with Western Crossing. So I'm not really feeling very inclined to extend a project timeline because they decided they didn't want to follow through with the original plan that they agreed to about a year ago. So when I look at some of the proposals that they're presenting for this second building, I don't see the job creation aspect that the public sort of expected from Harcourt or from anybody. What I see is a lot of service sector jobs and a building that will take advantage of the view but not really do much for the public benefit. So when the public took over this land, the expectation was that there would be something more than a small amount of public benefit. So the public obviously is going to get 30 acres of parks, which is great, but they're also paying for those parks. In the case of the redevelopment of the properties themselves, I'm not quite certain that what we're seeing from Harcourt on this second building proposal so far is really meeting the spirit of the intent that this board had when it took over the property. And to explain that further, I look at this situation in this way. If the outcome of this project, any of this project, is exactly what the private sector was going to do without public involvement, then why was this port involved? And I've said this before, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And when I'm looking at their proposal, I'm not seeing any reason that the port needed to be engaged, because they're going to reuse an existing building. The public is going to make the land available to them. So the public provides the benefit, Harcourt reaps the benefit, and the public gets a very limited amount of good job creation in exchange. So when I combine their proposal, which is still in the very early stages, with the fact that over the past year they've done very little on moving forward with their second building, I'm not really feeling very inclined to extend their deadline any further, just so that we can do something that I don't feel we should be doing. I'm not sure how Dan and Bobby feel about this, but they've had a year to come up with a second building proposal, and we have nothing. The deadlines are the deadlines, and I think that the public here expected them to come in, that they'd be knowledgeable, that they would know how to develop this property, and that they would move forward on the timelines that they agreed to. So today, I wouldn't be voting yes in favor of extending this deadline unless something significantly changes. Anything further from you two?
I do. Go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead.
A couple of things come to mind, and I'm a little bit in agreement with Mike. I think what I gathered out of some of the conversations, we're not even sure if they're going to use that particular building as their second building. Is that correct?
But we're fairly certain that's the second project they want to do, and that's why we're here for this. After the agreement was signed and they started looking at what their second building could be, Commissioner McCauley's correct, they changed course and they decided the board mill was a very usable building. It's very similar to a building they did in Liverpool into a hotel, and I think they saw those two projects as being very similar to each other and easily accomplished by them. Because it's not in their footprint, it's in the Western Crossing footprint, they logistically could not go and apply for a permit from the city because it's not a piece of property they control. So the fact they made that their second project pretty much meant they weren't going to make the deadline for applying for a permit for the second project.
I also have issues with the job creation that was in the design for the area down there changing along with the second building. The other thing that I have that comes to mind is when I ran for office, I was approached by several people that thought we should move the boundary further to the south into the Bellingham shipping terminal area and do away with more of our industrial area that we have there. And when you're going to approach Western Crossing to impede upon their property that was agreed to there, where is it just an adjustment, or are we going to have to go further south into our industrial area to provide property for those folks, which is something I do not want to do whatsoever.
I could comment on that. When we initially entered into the master development agreement with Harcourt, we actually contemplated them redeveloping the board mill building, and we didn't give them that piece that includes the board mill building, the 6 acres for Western Crossing, because we had an agreement with Western. But we put a provision in the master development agreement already, which is section 4.4.2, that said that if the Port, Harcourt, and Western Crossing agree to relocate the Western Crossing development to another location, that the boundary of the master development area would be amended, and that Harcourt would still have their overall acreage at 19 acres, but they would shift. So what we did was the Harcourt master development area wraps around the Western Crossing and goes to where Myrtle would extend. So it goes beyond Western Crossing into the log pond along the edge of Myrtle now. If we move Western Crossing over, we would then give the Western Crossing parcel to Harcourt and do a switch. Now, it may need to get pushed a little ways into the log pond in order to allow room for roads and things, but it would be a switch of property, not an addition to the Harcourt property. Their property would remain at 19 acres or as close as we could get and still have an even number.
When you say a little bit, how much is a little bit? I mean, are you talking 10 feet?
It's probably an acre or two that would need to get moved. We're going to need to, if we move Western, we'll need to get some roads in there and realign some parks. And all of those will be decided when we do the binding site plan to create the actual parcels. But it may be a few acres lost as extending a little further into the
south into our industrial area.
No one from Harcourt's here today?
No.
No.
You know, are they out of town or just didn't show, or?
Well, Pat Power's still in Ireland.
Or John Reed or someone to talk about this?
I talked to John this morning. John's an architect for Harcourt, but doesn't work directly for Harcourt.
My guess is they're watching on YouTube, so you could wave and they can acknowledge you.
If the second building that was originally planned was going to be next to the granary or thereabouts, how is the board mill going to differ from that building?
If the boundary of Western Crossing does not change and the second building for Harcourt goes next to the granary building, Western Crossing would probably demolish the board mill building. Western looked closely at that building years ago and said they have no interest in that building. So if Western moves forward in the site where it is, then the board mill building probably won't be adaptively reused, and there would be a different project next to the granary building. And that still is a possibility. If the Port Commission opts not to alter the Western Crossing site and decides not to sell that piece of land to Harcourt, then they still could move forward with a second building. It would be further up, closer to the granary.
I guess my question is, how would the second building next to the granary create more jobs than they could create in the board mill?
Well, it just depends on the use. The use proposed in the board mill is going to be a hotel and conference center, and I'm sitting as a port representative on the downtown partnership right now. What they have been striving to do for the last several years is to get a downtown conference center that would generate opportunities for conventions and bring people into town. So it might not be the blue-collar type or industrial type jobs that we're looking for in that area, but a conference center downtown might create a different type of tourism and business type jobs. If there's a different building next to the granary, the other second building they've been talking about is more residential. You would probably see residential on the top floors and retail on the bottom.
So, Sylvia, the public facilities district that was defunded, I think, 2 years ago now, commissioned a study that said a convention center in downtown Bellingham would never pencil. So why is it that now that the staff without the Public Facilities District thinks that it would?
Well, I've read that study, and it was a very well-done study. In fact, we've all read, or most of us have read that study. It was good. The difference between this site and the public development area site is it's right on the waterfront, right next to a park with a beautiful view, and next to where we would like to put Western. There'd be a lot of interplay between Western crossing if and when they get programs and facilities down here, and to be able to have a convention center and conference center next door so they could host events. I just believe the economics is a little different, and also the timing is a little different. I think several years ago we were all a little more cautious about spending money and investing money, where today the economy is a little stronger. But I can't say conclusively that there's a difference between this site and that site, but I think a site on the waterfront next to a network of trails and next to a university is going to pencil a little more than a site behind Chestnut in the middle of Old Town. It just might not, it's not a comparable site.
So that sounds reasonable, but we're certainly not experts on that.
No, we're not.
I would love to see somebody weigh in on this, but my problem with the proposal, and I know we're discussing extending a deadline on a permit for a different building, but what I thought would be a different building, which is turning out to be the board mill now. My problem with this is that where we have an opportunity to find new business on the waterfront, we are instead contemplating building a convention center, which we have no shortage of in this county. Mm-hmm. There are convention centers in this county. Why would we be supporting on this particular property competition for existing convention centers? That's a question that I think this commission should answer before we move forward with any sort of a conversation about saying yes to a convention center that's just going to compete with existing convention centers and bring no new and original business to the county, or even help a business expand in our county. So I'm just struggling with this whole concept of why a convention center is the right answer here, especially in light of what the Public Facilities District study came up with on a piece of property a quarter mile away, with, I would add, better views for their top floors.
If I can, Commission, this isn't just a convention center. It's essentially a hotel with residence and conference rooms. I don't think it's big enough to be called a convention center, but I guess it depends on how you draw the line on that. But so it serves all those purposes. There's been a lot of new rooms added in the Whatcom County market. They've all been absorbed. They've all proven to be pretty good business decisions by the people who built those hotels. And I think the developer sees that need in downtown Bellingham and is trying to meet that need. One of the reasons we shifted gears here and started looking hard at getting the board mill building into Harcourt's hands was because Commissioner McCauley expressed a desire to save the board mill building, and we knew that Western wasn't interested in keeping that building. So part of what we're doing here is trying to make sure that building is put to beneficial reuse.
That was going to be my next question. If we vote this down, that means Harcourt has to do the second building near the Granary building, and Western can tear down the board mill building.
I don't think that's what it means. I think that I'm not even sure this should have come in front of the commission, to tell you the truth. We did it just to make sure we dotted our I's and crossed our T's. They have a deadline to start construction by 2018?
2017. So they have a deadline to start construction about a year from now. If they miss this permit deadline, that doesn't mean they will miss the deadline to start construction, if you hear what I'm saying. So I'm not sure what the penalties are to them for you voting this down. That's why I'm not sure if it should have come to you for approval or not. Maybe Frank can comment on that.
I don't have the MDA in front of me. The MDA exhibit 4.1, which I do have.
Right. Right, the MDA 4.1, but we had some dotted lines on there that said this is when you should submit the permits, and then we allowed for a year for the city to approve the permits, and then the construction is scheduled to begin in 2017. And we did that partly because we wanted to hold Harcourt's feet to the fire a bit, to make sure that we didn't have years go by with nothing happening. So we gave some internal deadlines, knowing that it takes about a year to get a building permit for a complicated project. We wanted to make sure that they were making progress to get started so that by June of 17 or the middle of 17, that they would be ready to begin construction.
I've got a couple more questions. Go ahead, Dan.
I certainly don't want to see the board mill torn down. When you say it would extend an acre to the south, is that a long, narrow strip to make up an acre? Or is it way into the log pond? I mean, I'm not sure exactly how much of our industrial land we're going to give up, because I have to agree, I don't really want to give up any industrial land. But if it were a long, narrow acre along the edge, it's different than going straight out into the...
It would be an acre along the edge. The western crossing parcel right now is at an angle because the streets were going to be at an angle and the commercial green was going to be at an angle. We've now straightened out Laurel so that it goes along the board mill to allow us to adaptively reuse the board mill, and we would have 6 acres south of the board mill. So it'll be about an acre encroaching into the log pond, and if you would like to table this, we can come forward at the next meeting to be able to show you where that boundary is, or we can send you out our concept of where it is. Again, tonight all you're doing is considering extending the deadline. You're not considering moving the western parcel or extending the MDA. But if the western crossings parcel is moved, then the MDA boundary does need to also change.
A further question on the area that would be taken up. I haven't seen any plans of what they want to do with the board mill building. I've been told it's a hotel. I've also been told that they wanted to build another structure right behind it that would attach to it, that would move things further south. So when we're speaking about the acre, we're going to move, Sylvia, to the south possibly, that possibly could happen. Is that when we're just considering the board mill structure itself, or what they are proposing?
We took a look at what they were proposing. If they take the existing board mill building and wrap a new building around to the south of it, and then move Western Crossing, the 6-acre Western Crossing piece behind that. Okay. So it's about a net 1 acre, and we have a draft map. Until the Western Crossing is considered, it felt a little premature to bring that map forward because this really is about a timeline, not a map tonight. We certainly can share that with the commission, and if you wanted to table this, it could come forward to the next meeting and we could bring you that map.
A question to tabling this. What does this do? What is the timeline the commission needs to say for, we're going to give them the extension that will affect their timing for their permit?
I don't have the date. Is it May?
It is May 17th or May 19th is when they are supposed to have a complete building permit application completed. It's really already too late to get a complete building permit submitted by May 19th.
I think you've addressed my major concern on this one. They've had an entire year and have nothing ready. So we have been giving a lot of opportunity to local companies that need a little extra time. We do that quite a bit. We gave it to the owner of a small boat, small fishing boat, just a couple of weeks ago. But these aren't small local companies. These are professional developers who have in the past year not shown us movement on at least this particular project. And that's a little bit troubling to me. This seems like this was the easy part of it. Now, moving through the city's processes when you're not from the city can be a challenge, yet the proposal that they needed to have in isn't the challenge. The challenge is the process, and they haven't even gotten to the point of having a proposal ready for the process. So not being at that point after 12 months of knowing this is coming, I'm not, like I said before, I'm not feeling overly generous on this one, given the level of competence that we would expect from a company of their background and size. I know that they've had some issues recently with some partnerships regarding the granary. I also know that they have not hired enough local people that can help them with their processes moving through the city, especially that not being from here can be a bit of a challenge. I know that as a builder here, it can be a bit of a challenge. So I'm not sure that holding anybody's feet to the fire is what we've done on this particular issue. Now, in regards to the granary, I know they're moving ahead, so I'm not speaking to that process at all. But on this one, all they had to have was a plan ready. They didn't have to have anything else done, just a plan ready, and I'm not seeing that they've done that. I am seeing that they changed their minds midway. They didn't clear it through the commission first that they would be doing that, and that we would be likely to accommodate this change. And then a week before or 2 weeks before they're due to have their proposal in, they're asking for an extension because they haven't asked us to change their proposal. So, again, on this one, I'm just not feeling overly generous on extending this deadline. However, if we don't extend the deadline, it just sort of sets the commission up to follow through. Frank, help me out if you would, please. So there are some steps the commission can take if deadlines are missed. I don't think the commission would want to do that because I think it would maybe not show our ultimate faith in Harcourt. So there are legal steps we can take should they miss their deadlines. Am I speaking correctly?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Commissioners, the deadlines are really related to starting construction. So these are internal deadlines. Mm-hmm. I would point out to the Commission that there's been quite a bit of work between the port and the staff and the developer about kind of getting a final design of the overall site. And so what they're doing now is apparently they've focused on the board mill building as the next project to, for whatever reasons, assume economics, that it makes the most sense. And so now they're just asking to have time to develop that plan. But they wouldn't be in default until they failed to start construction on something. Then there is a procedure, notification, and then various things triggering the agreements, the various default provisions that would flow through all of this.
That's right.
So it is construction, it's not these kind of internal deadlines.
So if we table this, they aren't in violation of the contract at all?
I would have to read it more closely, Commissioners, because I don't have that in front of me.
So the deadline of May 17th is a deadline for?
The deadline of May 19 is when the exhibit to the master development agreement said they are supposed to submit a complete application.
Okay.
And that was the timeline that we thought was needed in order to then go through the design review and get city building permit approval in order to start construction by summer of 2017. It does take about a year. If they are a few months late in submitting the building application, they're going to have to really condense and have a very good application that can go through the permit process faster in order to start construction next summer.
I think I don't like kicking the can down the road, but in this case, I think we'd be better off to table this for a while. Their feet are still held to the fire, that they need to come forward shortly with a plan. I agree with Commissioner McCauley. They haven't gotten going as quick as I had hoped. On the other hand, I want to save that granary building, but I think we can anyway because that's in Western Crossing.
You mean the board mill?
Or board mill building. That's in Western Crossing. And although building next to the granary building, I think, would be a big plus. When I saw the design of the two new roads, that would be nice. But I just think we should table this. I think it still holds their feet to the fire.
Well, let's let's think about that, though, because if they missed the May 19th deadline, then what was the deadline for?
The deadline was a schedule, and they will then be starting to be into default. If the port wanted to, if they don't get construction by 2017, by the middle of 2017, then they will be in default. And after they're in default, then you have the option to terminate the agreement. You have the option to put them into a non-exclusive right and sell the land to somebody else. But I think that all of that would start with a letter to Harcourt saying they're in default, and then we begin into the default process. So we weren't really prepared to talk about default tonight because we weren't expecting this to come up. So why don't you give us a few weeks to research what are the next steps if they fail to put in a building permit application? And we can also bring you the map. But
I'd like to say I'm in agreement with Commissioner McCauley with, the year thing being enough time. But I'm also a fisherman, and you have to sometimes change gears in the middle of a program that you thought you had laid out that was going to work, and something comes along, a different fishery or whatever is better. So I totally understand and sympathize with the fact that they saw something better that would be, they think, a better deal maybe for the community and for them, however that works out. So I understand the change, and when you change, it takes time. And that's become very evident since I've become a commissioner, how much time it takes to change. So I'm very sympathetic to the fact that when you change, as they're doing, from a design within where they're at, that it takes the time, and they're simply, one side of me says they're simply trying to comply with the deadline things and asking for an extension to make the permits possible because they've changed directions. I understand that. I also think that we probably need more time as a commission to think about what we really want to do here, because I certainly don't want to kick the can down the road, so to speak, as Dan says. And I don't want to get these people upset and excited that, we're going to burn their feet at the fire, so to speak, that's been said. I don't want to do that. I want to try and be compassionate for everything that's going on here, make sure the commission, or help make sure that the commission does the right thing. So I'm not fully understanding yet, if we table this, exactly what it does to Harcourt as far as their permitting, what kind of bind that puts us in. I'm a little not quite getting all of exactly, and maybe Rob, you can enlighten us on that.
Let me jump in here, because I'm going to vote in favor of moving the date down the road. So because it doesn't do anything except for create. If we don't do it, it just creates a lot of work for you all. Right. Mm-hmm. But we don't have a legally binding thing that says in the NBA that says if they don't start, we can kick them out. It's the other deadlines that we have to worry about. Right. I will, however, say that when we made these agreements and we had the conversations about the agreements and we discussed the directions we wanted to go, we wanted a partner that was going to help us diversify and strengthen our local economy. And it's going to take a hell of a lot more convincing that a convention center downtown on that piece of property is the right way forward. So 6 months if they want 6 more months, but if they bring this convention center back, they better bring their A game, and they better bring this room full of people that tells us that's the right way forward, because I am not convinced it's the right way forward, especially given the study that the PFD put together, which is only a couple years old now. So if they want to move forward with this, at least with this commissioner, they're going to have a real uphill battle and a serious climb on their hands. Moving the date forward, I'm not going to have a heart attack about that, because it just creates more work for you if we don't. So.
And I just want to thank you, Commissioner, on that. Just to comment, the schedule points we put in there were kind of for us to look at and say we're on track. We now know we're not on track. We know we're going to miss the deadline for the permit. We know that there's a deadline for start of construction. We're not extending that. So we now all know, hey, we're a little bit off track. That's why it was in the agreement. It wasn't put in the agreement because if you missed this one or that one, you were defaulted out. That wasn't the intention. Certainly the start of construction was a default provision. I appreciate the commissioner's comments. I'm still confused how they could have put a proposal together when the land wasn't theirs. I mean, it wasn't in their control. I apologize to the commission because I thought I was keeping you up to speed as to what Harcourt's plans were. I thought I shared drawings about the board mill building with you. I apologize that wasn't done enough because it has been shared with me. So I don't want you thinking they haven't done any work on this. They've done substantial work on this. A lot of architectural work has been done, and I've seen all that, and I've been impressed with all that. So with that,
Let's just make sure that they're quite clear, though, that although they have conversations with you, and you have conversations with us individually, we have to agree as a commission. I'm not blaming you for any failures here, but they need to understand that we have to have this agreement between the three of us.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not we're up to speed on what they're proposing, it doesn't matter because the commission hasn't decided that we're okay with what they're proposing. So that's going to be something that they're really going to have to stay focused on as we move forward. So as new things come up, for example, this road shift that the city council said, oh, we're just going to change the road layout back to something that was discussed 8 years ago. Well, that didn't really come up for any of our discussion here. It was given to us, and we're going to decide. So these are things that I think that as a commission, we're going to definitely have to have more conversations about. So if there are some changes coming up, we need to have a public conversation about it. So.
Commissioners, one of the values of this discussion, which they can obviously see, is the understanding in a long-term relationship. This is the first big shifts, how that's going to take place, because keep in mind this agreement extends through about 2034. And so as the parties work to, things are, probably the one thing you can say about the plan is it's not going to be how it ends up in 2034. But as the parties move to understand their position, I think it would be helpful, rather than falling back on the legalese, to say this is our expectation as a business partner of what's going to happen. And so that they can be well aware of that, and then frankly, you can be well aware of what their thinking is in terms of making this project economically viable, and then the jobs components, everything else you have. So it probably is helpful for no other reason than to kind of get this organized when the first kind of shifting moves around.
Thanks for that. So I'm going to propose a vote on this. I will support this move, but like I said about the reason for it regarding the second building, I'm really uncomfortable with that. I think we have more conversation this commission has to have about that. But anything further from you, Mr. Robbins?
So the proposal before us is to extend it for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say that the folks at Harcourt have folks to answer to, us being some of them for the things they're doing, but this commission has a county to answer to. The county owns the property that we deal with over there, and we have to answer to those folks, and those folks want jobs, and they'd like good paying jobs. So when Mr. McCauley spoke what he spoke, I'm in full agreement with the fact that we need to get the best out of that area for our community, not for the commission and not for the Port of Bellingham, but the best for our community. And that's what we're here to do, all of us, our staff and the commission. And I just wanted to say that so you understand where we are coming from, and at least where this commissioner sits is the decisions we make are for Whatcom County and the best we can do for them.
All right, so all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, none opposed. Thank you very much. Good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, Sylvia. Thank you, Rob. We are going to move on to action item number 4 now.
A motion authorizing the executive director to execute amendment number 3 to the professional services agreement with Landau Associates Incorporated to perform construction management and reporting at the Cornwall Avenue landfill site in the amount of $123,200 for a total contract amount of $839,390.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowan, Director of Environmental Programs. This is actually one of the action items that was tied actually back to the All-American Marine Project. As you mentioned earlier, Commissioner McCauley, there were a number of items that fell onto the consent agenda. This is really similar to those. I don't have a presentation, but it is construction management oversight for the Cornwall component of moving that Hilton Hill material over to Cornwall. And so that project has a number of different funding sources, and the All-American Marine Project in and of itself has different funding sources, different regulatory parts. This particular part is being done under the Cornwall Avenue landfill consent decree. So we're actually doing that move, taking that Hilton Hill material over to the Cornwall Avenue landfill, constructing a component of the environmental cap, actually preloading the landfill portions to allow it to settle so that when we construct the final cap that it will not settle differentially and cause cracks in the final environmental cap. So it has a number of different cleanup components to it. So it's being managed separately, and this is the contract with our environmental consultant, Landau Consultants, who will oversee the construction management, the reporting back to the Department of Ecology, the settlement monitoring, and a number of other kind of cleanup-related components to that project. This is a MODCA Remedial Action Grant funded project, so we do have 50% grant funding for that from that existing grants that I talked about earlier tonight, as well as it's an AIG covered site as well, so the remaining 50% of this is covered by the AIG insurance policy. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Briscoe.
No, we're just moving dirt, right?
Well, yeah. So this Cornwall Avenue landfill, which will become a park someday. I know some people want it dug up, but I don't think there's enough money for that. What's the latest conversations about when someday is? Not someday.
Well, from the land use side of things on that one, it's kind of an interesting segue from the previous discussion, but that's the city of Bellingham's project, the park itself. So they have completed a master plan for the Cornwall, what they currently call the Cornwall Beach Park, and that includes the Cornwall Avenue landfill and then the adjacent R.G. Haley site, and that kind of extends all the way back to the intersection of Cornwall and Pine at the, kind of by our maintenance facility. So they have completed a master plan that programs that park that shows kind of the general idea of what they want to do there. That's been adopted by the city council. So now they're really waiting on three main parts. The Cornwall Avenue landfill cleanup to occur. We're pretty well on schedule for that. We're doing part of that work right now. We seized an opportunity to do something early here with this Hilton material. They have to complete the R.G. Haley cleanup, which is a city-led cleanup project, and that actually is a fairly complex and expensive project. They're working on that right now. They have a completed RIFS, but they don't have a final cleanup plan yet. And then the last thing is they have to get funding. So they have to figure out the park funding on how to pay for the construction of that park. So I believe it'll be a multiple phases of development. We should be done with our environmental cleanup on the Cornwall side of things before R.G. Haley is done, or they will be done in conjunction if we maybe slow down the rest of the Cornwall side. But we really have to wait for Haley to catch up. That's the main kind of limiting factor right now. I would say, I hate to use this because we get a hard time in our division, but probably a couple of years. Yeah. So it'll be two to 5 years really before that is really eligible to be opened up for public access, I would imagine.
So when the white tarps were put on the mound down there, they had an expectation of, I think, a five-year life on that. I think it's going to go beyond, and I'm just saying that as a sort of a time frame place marker, but we're certainly going to get beyond that 5 years since that's happened before the city is able to actually put a park or any kind of park space there.
Correct. Yeah. So that'll be we're really coming up right on the 5 years right now, but we're pretty well on track for the Cornwall cleanup. So what we anticipate is that those will be those white tarps will be removed. That material will be graded out and then capped as the final environmental cap for the Cornwall landfill. We could do that in the next year or so. The really limiting factor on the Cornwall cleanup is going to be the sediment cleanup and the shoreline stabilization, and there'll be federal permitting that can take a fair amount of time. We have an engineering design report that's under review by Ecology right now, so we're really pretty well on track. I don't think it's going to be another 5 years for those tarps to be addressed, but I do think it's going to be another year or so. We could break the upland and the in-water apart. We have that set up in our agreements already with ecology that we could do some early upland work. Then you're losing some efficiency of doing two multiple projects and how they tie together at the shoreline. So it's not the ideal, but if we got really hung up on permitting for the subtidal and the sediment cleanup, we could potentially do more early action on the upland side.
My guess would be that you would want to coordinate the in-water work with the city's in-water work, because that's, I think, the most contaminated spot in the bay right now.
Yeah, exactly. They have to be coordinated, because if we put down a clean cap on top of the subtidal landfill and they have to dredge out some significantly contaminated sediments, it just would stir up and recontaminate this clean stuff we just put down. So the sediment cleanups are going to have to be done either phased together or directly together.
All right, so the upland part, that's, I mean, the city's got to build the park, not the port, but with the additional soils that are coming from Hilton that are going over there, does that finish the port's sort of upland fill portion of it, or is there more that has to be done?
There'll still be more. This was kind of an opportunity. We had material that we could reuse. We were going to have to purchase and do this anyway, so we could relocate this, save money, not take borrowed material from a gravel pit. So it's a really good opportunity. It doesn't have to be structural fill because it's a park. So this is really a good opportunity to use this.
Okay.
So does the pile of dirt for All American Marine, it's going down there, does that go on top or under what's in the white tarps?
It actually goes behind. So it's actually going to go, I could pull up the map here. That might be the easiest way. Does this go right?
So are we just going to pile it up down there and wait for a later date? Or is it going to be spread out as we go?
It'll be put out in its final configuration, actually. So it'll be placed in its final location. It might have to have some light grading done to it in the finished product. But these are the white tarps. This is actually the inner harbor line here that goes through here. This is the material that was placed from the dredging project, from the Gate 3 project. The anticipation is that this material from Hilton is going to go in approximately this footprint here. And that'll be placed in its final configuration. There'll be some settlement that'll happen because it's placed on fill material, and so that's the whole idea, is that it would actually compress the compressible garbage and wood waste that's below that, and that would then allow us, once we do, what then we'll do is come in, we'll grade this material out to remove those tarps, grade that out, put down the final cap over this whole area here, and then that will then tie right into what we've placed here from the Hilton material back in here. So that the final grading will tie those all together. This will actually, the material will be placed and then hydroseeded with grass. So it's not going to be another set of tarps down there, but it will be another couple stockpile looking kind of shapes, but they'll be hydroseeded for, they don't need to be covered.
So then that will be pushed over what's...
Almost. The material, the Hilton material is going to be in its final configuration. We're not going to be pushing it around anymore. Maybe a little bit at the surface just to get the finals,
So then we're going to have to find more capping.
We're going to have to bring more capping material in as well. So this was an opportunity to use material that was already accessible, but we will have to bring in some material. That's why in the earlier discussion, like Adam and John were saying, is that we would have taken as much as we possibly could because we could use it all at the Cornwall Avenue landfill.
So Brian, I know the rest of this after the porch project is done is City Park, but I would like to share that I've heard from a lot of people that if it is a very long-term out there, down the road kind of thing because of the R.G. Haley site, that something as simple as a grassy field that's a dog park would be a welcome amenity in the interim. So I just want to share that if you might share that with City.
Yeah, I've passed that on. I've talked to the city parks because I was on the stakeholder group as part of the steering committee on the Cornwall Beach Park Master Plan, and we did talk about maybe some early access, a trail system that was just a loop similar to the ASB trail that would allow folks to get out there and just walk around. The shoreline is the biggest probably consideration. Is there probably would have to be some significant fencing. That whole beach is it's literally garbage. I mean, it looks like it's rocks filled in with glass, but it's rocks that are covering over a landfill. And so it's a health hazard if you were really to get out there and have kids running around bare feet, that kind of thing. So.
All right. Anything further? No? All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Commissioners?
Thanks very much, Brian. So you trying to sneak that in the consent agenda, were you? We are moving on to action item number 5, and Mr. Fulton will be presenting. Diane, please.
A motion to authorize the executive director to execute professional services agreement, or PSA amendment number 13, with Berger A. Bam to design immediate and interim repairs for the Harris Avenue Pier Replacement Project in the amount of $30,200 for a total authorized PSA amount of $1,396,257.
Good evening, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. 6 weeks ago, the Commission approved an amendment to this PSA to do, again, explore this pier, the section there that's in the red box on the drawing in front of you. The pier had not been surveyed in about 4 years. We were doing design work, getting ready to do more detailed design work, and the information was simply too old. So the Commission at that point, 6 weeks ago, authorized us to go in and update that information, which we've done. And now this kind of second phase of that same work then is to go ahead and design the interim repairs to that dock. In that 6 weeks, we've met with Puglia Shipyards a few times, and they're very excited for their future, very cooperative in this work. And essentially what we're going to be doing to this pier are three things. We're going to do an immediate repair to make it safe and passable. And the second thing would be to do an interim repair, and that interim repair is going to get us about 16 to 18 months of life so we can get to the 2017-18 fish window, at which point we'll do the third step, which is replacement of the pier. So we're trying to just make it habitable so they can stay in operation and safe, and yet not overspend on the pier that's going to be eventually demolished and replaced. What you see here is a condition survey. The way to read this drawing is this is a match line over here, and this matches on to this. So this is in effect one long pier, but for the sake of the drawing, they stack it like this. This is the beach end here, and this end out here is where it connects to the newer concrete heavy load section. So, and then what you see here in the middle is their drive lane, and today they're just a little bit skittish about operating on that, and so we, with our own crews, are stepping in and doing some immediate repairs. Those are shown in red. They are not in water work. They are on top of the piling that are there, and they're basically replacing the caps in place. Those are 12 by 12 treated caps. So that's what you see in the red corrections there, and again out here. And what that does is restore that drive lane to an 8,000-pound axle load, which is what they need to operate safely, as well as pile replacement. And this has to wait for the in-water fish window. But this, what both of those repairs, the immediate and the interim, get us to is this capacity for the pier. The green, light green here would be where the 8-ton, original 8-ton axle is next excited about. We'd be out to bid approximately 4 to 6 weeks from now to do the interim repairs, if I said that correctly. And then that would get us through as we work to do some planning with them over the winter to then do the replacement of that pier in one fish window, along with the $6 million Motka cleanup that's also associated with that site. Do the commissioners have any questions about this project?
I'm going to jump in. Can you go back to the other slide? It shows the interim.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. The pile cap that's being replaced right now in the red, those are 12 by 12 wooden beams?
The commissioner's correct.
Okay, and then the blue ones, why are you not doing those now as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an engineered answer. What this pier has going for it, a row of piles, such as here, and here, and here, those are called bents. And fortunately, this pier is built on 6-foot bents. So very, very close together. At our shipping terminal, for instance, it's 25-foot bents between the caps. So these are 6-foot bents. And so, in other words, by replacing just those strategic caps, the other areas can be bridged to meet that 8,000-pound requirement.
Well, why not do the blue ones now as well in the same manner?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our goal is to do as little as possible in these immediate repairs and put as much as possible into the interim repair. The difference, and the reason for that is that it'll be our crews doing these red repairs. We're simply not as equipped at this work as contractors in this business are.
Okay. And it looks like you're replacing 6 piles?
I'd have to do a count. There's at least 6. I believe there's actually more fender piles if we counted those as well. There's 1, 2, 3, 4.
5 in that first, and then there's one in here with, yeah.
Yeah, I see 5 right off the top. I believe that is correct, Commissioner. That I only see 5. But.
Well, there's one in the upper at bent 26.
Oh yeah, the Commissioner's correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You bet.
So the interim repairs, our time frame for that is?
The interim repairs would be in this next fish window. In-water work window. So it'd be we'd go out to bid in June, award in early July, start getting materials here and do any work we can above the ordinary high water before the in-water work window opens in August, and then complete. Yeah. Again, that all needs to be coordinated with the shipyard and when they can live with us being there, et cetera.
So 2017, that work would be done?
No, the interims will be done this year, just months from now, and then those repairs will stay in place for 16 months until the 17 fish window, and then we'll replace this whole entire pier.
Okay. So we've got the immediate in the red.
Correct.
And in the span you're speaking to of the 6-foot, and we can get out to 25-foot. So, I mean, what they've engineered here is we don't really need to worry about the interim repair. So I guess the question in my mind is why are we even going to bother with the interim repair? We could do the immediates, and it doesn't seem like it's that long until we're going to replace the pier.
Oh, yeah, I understand the Commissioner's question. If I could draw the attention back to this final slide. So when we do the immediate repairs shown in red, then we are just preserving the drive lane. Okay. At the 8,000-pound axle load. When we add the interim repairs to the pier, then we not only increase that 8,000 to 16,000, which greatly helps them in hauling materials out to their heavy load, but it also creates this whole portion out here on the end of the pier that is suddenly heavy capability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Adam.
Very welcome.
So, Adam, we're going to spend $30,000 to design and temporarily repair this.
No, not exactly. The $30,000 is for the interim design of what will be a bid award back to this commission about 6 or 8 weeks from now, and that'll be for about $300,000 worth of work, approximately.
And that's going to be work that will be replaced later?
That's correct.
So we're going to spend $300,000 trying to beef this up just so they can get equipment out to their barges.
The Commissioner's correct.
Okay. You know, I was in that carpenter shop when they tried to drive a heavy piece of equipment, and it was just like there's an earthquake. I mean, it was unbelievable. Yeah. So they're really in tough shape, and they're very busy right now, so.
I thought you were going to speak to the quality of the old construction that's still standing, even after all of that. No?
You know, it is a struggle to spend $300,000. Not laying blame anywhere, but I think the process that Brian was speaking to earlier with MACA really threw this all out of whack, and that's leading us to a point where we're spending more money than we really needed to in the first place. But again, not placing blame, of course, but there's no other way to keep this thing operable without these repairs.
Again, we are trying to, find that sweet spot between keeping them operational in a efficient manner for their business, and yet not overspending on what we know are going to be temporary repairs. Yeah.
Question, Adam. I know a lot of the docks and a lot of the ports I've been to, they have issues with their docks, and they span it with heavy steel plate.
Yep. Already been done.
That's already been done there?
Yeah.
And that, with the immediate repairs, that won't suffice for them for what they need on the other dock? I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, the commissioner is at the disadvantage of not having the history, and so I don't mean to offend at all. The steel plate solution was about 5 years ago, and the bridge on top of the steel plate solution was about 3 years ago.
Okay. So we're sandwiching them.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Adam. And thank you for the explanation.
Yeah.
So now that we have gotten this back in the MACA pipeline, huge thank you to everybody who was involved in that, and some lobbied our folks in the legislature, and we got some money. So what was the grand total, and when's it available?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You're right. This was set up so that we would avoid this situation, and then the MODCA money went away. And the Harris Avenue Shipyard has actually been one of the kind of poster child examples of why the MODCA fund really needed to be reestablished. So the answer to your question though is, yeah, we have gotten word from Ecology that we have the $6 million that I highlighted. They are authorizing now their grant contracts managers to tell us, and I've heard it as early as next week, that we are eligible to apply for that grant. And then there's a little bit of a process, but it's not locked in, but it's about as good as you can get. So we should know in the next week or two that we have the green light to apply, and that really should lock us in.
You know, one thing that bothers me about this conversation we've had about MACA, especially this last year, and I'll draw attention, if you remember the slide that Brian showed earlier, where projects were ranked, and they showed 19 and 20 and all that, starting at 13, whatever it was. I noticed on your slide also that it had the legislative district in there. And it feels to me that what especially has happened this past year, because the money has been drawn away from MACA, which has put us here with our expectations sort of up in the air. And now, to me, it seems like it's really become a politicized process where we're literally begging our individual cohort down there, either in the 42nd or the 40th, to go to bat for us for something that should just be, you know, a normal everyday process and not a legislative process where they're having to go to bat for us. But like I will say again, thank you all for everybody that went down and lobbied for that. So they did come through, but it's a little frustrating, especially for you and this port to move forward without those commitments being solidified, without a sort of a legislative process, I should say. So.
Yeah, no, just one quick note on that. I think that I wouldn't disagree with you at all that there is a political side to that. Anytime you get into the budget discussions, there is. On the other hand, there is some of the ranking criteria includes geographic dispersion. So that might be one way that they track how these projects and how the funds are dispersed geographically across the state, to make sure that, almost to do the opposite, to make sure that not one legislative district is getting 90% of the funding. But
well,
I'll let you interpret
I'm
that.
glad you pulled that out, because one of the things that bothered me was that if we do end up lobbying, let's say this port does a very, very good job of lobbying for commitments that we thought we had, say, 10 years ago, then we're putting other smaller ports and municipalities at a disadvantage, especially those who may not have our lobbying capacity. And I certainly wouldn't want to do that, because we are a one state. So if there's a way to avoid that, I don't know if there is a way to avoid it, but having MACA restored to a state of health, not just monetarily, but in functionality, I think maybe some of those conversations we might have on our next trip down with our legislature. That's it on this one. Anything further? Yeah. No? All right, cool. So all in favor on this one, say aye.
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 Super cool. That is the end of our regular program.
Mr. President, if I may interrupt just for one moment, one casualty of our agenda reshuffle was that one of our guests came in where he might have normally been expected to be in the agenda. This All-American Marine project is about $9 million, and next meeting we'll be bringing the GP capping project to you in about another $2 million. Both of those projects appear to have the same company as their apparent low bidder, and that is our local Ram Construction. So I just wanted to take just a quick moment to introduce the president and owner of Ram Construction, Michael Hammes, back here. And Mike's got a fantastic history. He was a Bellingham firefighter, and one of his cohorts, Rob Wilson, friend of mine, they decided to form a little construction company, Rob and Mike Construction, Ram. And
didn't know that.
And Rob still fights fires. He's one of our battalion chiefs, I believe. And Mike went on to leave the fire service and be an outstanding local businessman. So we're really, really glad for the high caliber of contracting Mike represents, and looking forward to doing the projects with him.
And thank you for your patience. I didn't know this. You were still here. So
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely.
I not knowing I was going to, excuse me, have an opportunity to speak to the commission. Thank you for allowing me to say hello and say thank you not only on behalf of myself and the families in our company, but the families of all of our subcontractors and suppliers. There's a huge percentage of local families that are going to benefit from the economic activity, so we're very grateful for that. And the partnership between you and All American Marine, I think it's going to have a big difference in terms of multiplier effect locally with the dollars staying right here. So thank you very much.
And you got a few ringers lined up for this year's Ski to See, I imagine?
Yes, sir. We can't speak to that, though.
Congratulations on your low bid.
Thank you.
New business. Mr. Robbins?
Don't have anything?
Nothing? Mr. Briscoe?
I don't have any new business, but I'd like to mention that Sylvia Goodwin, our planning director and economic director, and I went to Point Roberts last evening, had a very, very lengthy meeting into the evening with the folks up there about their lighthouse project they'd like to get started, amongst some other things. And I'd like to thank Sylvia for being there and answering numerous questions that I would not have been able to field. So thank you, Sylvia, for your time. It was a good meeting for you guys to understand. It was a very good meeting, and I think there was a lot of maybe misunderstanding about what the port could or couldn't do for those folks up there. And I think that between Sylvia and a little bit from myself, we help clear some of that up, and assured to those people that we can help facilitate, and anything we can do, we will try to do for them in their endeavors to increase their economic stability at Point Roberts. So thank you again, Sylvia. And I'd also like to say that I'm always around pestering staff since I'm the new commissioner, and thank you to staff for putting up with your new commissioner. You've helped me a lot in understanding how things are working here at the port and what you've done in the past. And Adam, don't be afraid to school me once in a while. It's needed. Thank you.
I got schooled a lot my first year.
I did want to point out that our airport, Sunil's still here, our airport's gotten 3 really nice awards this year. You know, we hear everything about revenue being down, but we've gotten 3 really nice awards. And the big one of being the nicest, friendliest airport. I know that what they give it to us for. It wasn't friendliest. It was the most
Customer service.
Customer service. I was talking at the Taste of Whatcom today with 2 of our ambassadors that work out there, volunteer out there, and they hadn't even heard about it. So we need to really tout the good things that are happening in our airport. And congratulations to you and your staff for all 3 of those awards this year.
Hey, Sunil, we have some screens. Maybe we should throw a little, some graphic or something about those nice awards and remind people that their airport is doing well. Because I think Commissioner Robbins is right. I don't think a lot of people even know that work here.
The terminal screens, you mean?
Yeah,
we do advertise, so we should self-promote a little bit on those.
Just a little,
screens.
not too much.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
No, with the door casings, they're only so wide coming in, so they're not too much.
Yeah.
People in the audience have anything?
Oh, no, I've got something. We'll go through the.
You do?
Yes. So we had the presentation about the fueling situation in Blaine. I think that Rob has an expectation that we're going to give you a direction forward? Do you need that right away? How would you like to handle that?
It's totally up to you. I mean, the longer it takes to get direction, the longer it takes to do anything. So if there's action expected, it's appreciated sooner than later. But
well, I'll weigh in now. I haven't really shifted much since the last time we talked about this. The fueling situation with Semiahmoo is not within the harbor, but it's not. I don't think it's ridiculous that it's a huge challenge for people to get fuel there. So I would say that we would move forward. But I would want an agreement with Semiahmoo to provide fuel that they can't turn people away, et cetera, all the sort of standard stuff that the expectations that the service at the port could provide if we had fuel available, that they would do the same thing. And at whatever the price would be. I don't know how to set that. But anyway, so if you want to weigh in with Rob right now, just send that direction forward, or if you want to wait on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did kind of went right across the radar. But, yeah, if we can come up with an agreement with Semiahmoo for now, I think the situation with the oil sheen we have on the water there and with the Maka situation, I don't think there's any way for us to proceed forward with anything until we know what's exactly going on with that. If we have a leak there, if something's liable to get moved up, and we can take care of that now, because we certainly can't do anything until that is decided and taken care of. So as far as staff spending more time on whether we can put a fuel dock in there or not, I think that would be a waste of their time. I would like to have an agreement with Semiahmoo in place. And with the understanding that this doesn't mean I want to drop the fuel dock thing at Blaine, but I think we probably should table it for now until we have more information as to what's going to go on with the site as far as the cleanup. And also an agreement with Semiahmoo in black and white that this is what they're going to do.
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Go that way?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go that way with that.
Thank you.
We here at the port, and I shouldn't say we, the Port Commission gets a lot of credit for things that we didn't actually do. So the Port of Bellingham was recognized by Sculpture Northwest, which is a relatively new organization here in Whatcom County with some really, really tremendous people that themselves are internationally recognized for their efforts, both as artists and as representing the art community. So they presented the ports a recognition of our contribution to the placement of public sculpture. They said the city of Bellingham, although the airport is not within the city limits just yet, but it is in regards to the story pole that Rob was so instrumental in reaching out to our friends at the Lummi Nation and the artists to make happen at the airport. So the cool thing about that story pole is that a lot of those wooden totems are not even being placed anymore because they typically ended up outdoors, and there's a movement afoot to stop that from happening now. So we've because they get destroyed and they're so hard to maintain. So having a location like that's really cool, and Sculpture Northwest recognized the port's efforts for doing that. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Commissioner. The artist was very excited to have his sculpture indoors and in protected high traffic public area. So I think you're spot on with that.
Super cool. Dan.
I have one other item. Dan Stahl isn't here now or tonight, but I'm sure you'll see this, but we're going to have the MAT committee weigh in on the Blaine fuel dock. There's no need for them to do that now at their meeting. They can take that off that agenda.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
All right, and one more little backslapping thing. Again, a lot of people don't know things like this because they're just somewhat internal. Rob has done with staff help a lot to save this organization money. And when we say this organization money, that's money we can spend on other things. So I think in the past month, we were walking on the street and we kind of did some math in our head. I think in the past month, you all have managed to save about $1.6 million, I think, between the bonds and the All-American Marine Project. And there was one other that
the capping on the GP site was one that saved some money. And I think there's one more project that saved some money.
So I
Well,
think,
the cuts we've taken at the airport have been huge. to
Cost
say
saving
the
measures at the
least.
airport, yeah. And the staff here is just incredible about that. They're all very financial savvy. Everyone understands the financial importance and the cash flow considerations. At the end of the day, cash is king. We're a cash organization. We can only spend what we have in the bank, and people get that. And we got an incredible director group here and manager group that manages the budget.
so like I said, a lot of people don't recognize this. The commission gets to see this. We recognize it, and definitely want to extend that thanks, because this past month has been really tremendous for the savings that you all have found. So thanks for that. Anything further, gentlemen? No. Rob, anything? No. Senior staff? Senior staff? Anybody? Anybody from the public want to say anything before we recess till the next time? All right. With that, we are officially out.